Okay, so we'll just get started. I know there's a few more people still to join us, but we'll get started anyway. So welcome, first of all, to Belfast Design Week 2021. This is the first day of that, but it's also the first sustainability series talk as well. And today is all about forward thinking for fashion and design. So a massive welcome to everyone here this morning. If you want to ask any questions or stay in touch with us beyond this, you can check us out on Twitter at Belfast Design Week and also the Belfast Met at E3_Belfast Met. And really this event is in partnership with Belfast Met and Connected NI as well. So massive thanks to both organisations for helping make this happen as well. So my name is Karishma. I'll tell you a little bit about myself later on. But we're just going to get started by telling you a bit more about what the series of events is all about. So today is the first session, Forward Thinking in Fashion and Design, but really it's the start of many more conversations as well. And the conversations will be about sustainable design and fashion and textiles. It's all about what sustainability really means, because to many people it means many things and it can mean many things. So it's unpacking all of that with people that are actually researching at the helm of sustainability in design, but also designers and businesses that are actually putting sustainable design into practice as well. So the conversations start today, but will continue into 2022 as well. And it's the same with Belfast Design Week, kicking off today and continuing into next year as well. So to give a brief introduction about myself, I'm of course co-founder of Belfast Design Week, but with the Belfast Met as well, over the past year and a half, I've been involved in quite a few innovation projects, and that's how I've met the lovely team there as well. So I am myself a multidisciplinary designer, and I feel like I know a little bit about sustainability, but really in this series, I'm also looking forward to learning all about it as well. So within Belfast Met, we've been working a lot with innovation projects, and my special interest within this is fashion and textile design. This is the area that I started off in within design, how I started my own company. And currently myself and Lorna, who I'll introduce in a second, are working on a lot of projects together as well. So my special interest within all of that as well is about understanding new trends, strategies, innovation, and also the technology in that sector as well. So my colleague Lorna, she's worked within the fashion industry for over 30 years, and having met and worked with her, she is multi-talented. She can do many, many things. Her experience goes across bespoke design and manufacture, historical costume, innovation, fashion illustration, many, many different things. And she's been an innovation specialist with Belfast Met for over 7 years, providing design and prototyping, upskilling and knowledge transfer as well for many companies that you can actually see out there doing incredibly well within Northern Ireland too. So now I'll hand over to Lorna, who's going to take us through a bit about sustainability and an overview of this topic.
Okay, hello everybody and welcome. Thank you for joining us and taking the time out this morning to hear a bit more about sustainability within the fashion industry. So this is really just a bit of an overview as to what sustainability really is. So what does it mean? It's the avoidance of depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance. And just to give a bit more information on that, we as humans on this planet, we are actually using our natural resources 1.75 times faster than the ecosystems can generate. And what does that really mean? So that just means that, yeah, it is good to use natural products because they will decompose and break down at the end of their lifespan. But society is using them at such a fast rate that our ecosystems within our planet are really struggling to replenish these supplies. So then moving on to the fashion industry is the third most polluting industry in the world. So that is quite a high ranking. And that really comes in after the fuel industry, which is sitting at number 1. And agriculture, then it sits at number 2. And a large amount of waste happens at the manufacturing, at that production stage whenever the clothes are made. And that's really including raw materials and then that energy waste that's used as well. And a large amount of waste happens then at the consumer stage. And this is really because we throw our clothes away. They're relatively inexpensive to buy, so they have a very short lifespan. We also overly wash our clothes, and every time we do that, if they're man-made fibers, we are actually then depositing lots of tiny microplastics into the water supply. So moving on then to the global impact of this. So what does that mean for the planet? First of all, we have our resources depletion. So that is using non-renewable natural sources, our natural products, at such a fast rate that growth and production cannot keep up. Climate change, the effect that it has on the planet. This is really due to the emission of greenhouse gases. And whenever we do have these greenhouse gases, they are basically, heat is being trapped in the atmosphere. And that really is then having this impact and causing this global warming. Water pollution, which is a big issue. And this is really where contaminated water is re-entering our water supplies. And that really is meaning we are having things like our pesticides and insecticides are really going into that water stream. And I will talk a bit more about the water pollution in a moment. So habitat destruction, and this is really where through pollution, we're destroying habitat, and also through really clearing for planting, you know, for different, like for cotton and things like that. There's a lot of agricultural land being cleared and habitats destroyed. So air pollution, and this is really through those carbon emissions. And again, we will take a look at that further into our little presentation. And one of the other things then just to cover is this human rights abuses. And usually whenever you see sustainability within the fashion industry, then it sort of brings in this ethical fashion as well, because there are lots of sort of manufacturers and factory workers where there's poor treatment of those workers. There's very low pay, and in many cases there's child or slave labour, and very poor sanitary conditions, which means then that can then have a knock-on effect and cause a lot of illness within their workers. And moving on then, going to take a look at the textile dyeing and this water contamination. So 20% of the world's wastewater comes from the fashion industry. So that is a huge percentage of the world's water. And a lot of the wastewater containing dyes and chemicals are dumped into the streams and rivers. And this is really from sort of fabric treatments such as bleaching, dyeing, and also things like anti-wrinkle sort of coatings and things like that on the fabrics. And then because they are all being dumped into the rivers and streams, it's destroying our ecosystems. And also it has been linked to human health concerns, and in some cases cancer, gastrointestinal problems, and skin irritation. Now, World Bank did carry out an investigation, and they tested the water, and they have actually identified on one occasion 72 different chemicals in that wastewater that is going then back into our water supply in some shape or form. So then moving on, just to take a look at some of the startling facts. I was actually quite surprised with this one whenever I was looking at this, and this was really from National Geographic, and it's saying to make one cotton shirt, it takes 2,700 litres of water, which is a massive amount of water. But to put that into some sort of perspective, that's enough water for one person to drink for 2.5 years. So it is having a huge impact on our water supply. So then moving on to take a look at these global emissions. And the fashion industry, according to Business Insider, is responsible for 10% of the total global carbon emissions. And so what are these emissions, or what do they come from? And it's really sort of those manufacturing processes to get that fabric made and put it out and then for use within the fashion or textile industry. So the CO2 emissions for polyester manufacture is almost 3 times higher than those for cotton. And that was just a survey carried out by Greenpeace. So just to give you a bit of an idea, although we're sort of shifting towards these natural fibers because they do break down, you can see that where there's less CO2 emissions when using the like of cotton. But again, on the other hand, you can see how much water is being used when, to manufacture a cotton t-shirt or a cotton shirt. The other thing that then causes a lot of emissions is landfill. There's a lot of clothing and textiles go to landfill, and as a statistic, there's 85% of textiles in the USA alone that goes to landfill. They're then incinerated, and then there's production of the CO2, and then, as I said, these get trapped in the atmosphere, and then that is what leads to this global warming. So then moving on, this is then a report by McKinsey, and they actually carry out a lot of reports within the fashion industry and sort of keeping abreast of everything that's going on. And this is just to give you an idea of the annual greenhouse gas emissions. And this is apparel and footwear, so it is combined. But it just breaks it down into each of those, and you can just see where they sit. It just gives you a visual. And it includes the material production, yarn preparation, fabric preparation, wet processes, the cut, make and trim. That's when it really gets into sort of the fashion industry where we're sort of cutting and making the garments. They have to be transported to retail, then they're used, and then they talk about the end of life, and depending what that is, they could then just be going to landfill, and we will talk about later how we're trying to look at recycling a lot of products. So then to take a look at our current fashion industry, and it is a linear economy. So we're primarily working on this linear economy. That means that we're taking our natural resources and we're then making, so we're going into production and making those garments. Then when we talk about the consumption, that's then the user is and how that garment or piece of textile is being used. And then when we talk about waste, it's being thrown away, and that really is the end of its life. So we really do need to move to this more circular economy. And yes, in some cases, we are still bringing in some raw materials or virgin products, but we're then moving into the design, the retail, the consumption, collection and recycling. So then that can move back to the design and the retail. And there are a lot of companies now are looking at how they can use recycled materials. And also there are a lot of, we know now that there's a lot of sort of sites online like a Vestair and eBay and Depop and whatever, where people can then sell sort of their used clothing. And then again, that then sort of is putting it into this cycle, and it's avoiding it going to landfill, which is ideally what we're wanting to do. So how do we make these changes? And we'll move on and take a look at those. So how do we make fashion more circular? So again, there's a lot of it then sort of down to sort of these raw materials and these textile manufacturers, but it also then falls on the head of designers and that as well, in that what fabrics they're selecting to use. So again, to make these, we're relying on more innovative textiles, and we are looking at more plastics being used and being used for fabrics and then being put into production, for example, through maybe workwear or uniforms. We need more manufacturing technologies to help use and recycle. We're dependent on those management systems within these businesses. And again, they need to be looking at really new business models and how they're going to help the economy, and they're going to sort of look at this recycling and this more circular way of doing things. What we can do as the consumer, we can use like customization, where products are taken, they're changed, and then they're used again. So again, that's sort of lengthening the lifespan and meaning they're not going to landfill just as quickly as they would be. There are also places maybe starting to these take back systems where if you'll bring back an article of clothing, you'll maybe get a percentage of something new, and maybe it will then be recycled or resold. There's a lot of high-end brands are now starting with accessories and bags. They're actually buying back and refurbishing and selling. Repair services is another way to keep that sort of garment or that product to lengthen that lifespan. And again, this does happen. The like of Tricker's shoes, you can actually send back your shoes and get a total overhaul. They come back looking like a new pair of shoes. But again, you can still keep that same pair of shoes and use them for quite a long space of time. And then the recycling schemes, this is really where we're sort of saying don't throw out your fabrics and that, try and look at the alternatives. Can you put it in somewhere where it will maybe get a second use, or if it can't, then can it be broken down and recycled and woven into a new fabric? And then what I'm just going to do, I'm just going to leave you with a final thought, and then just moving on here. Okay, just waiting for a final slide. And this is really just a final thought. We all do think that I'm going to clear out my wardrobe and I'm going to only keep more sustainable clothes. I'm going to do all these different things. And this is really just food for thought. The most sustainable garment is the one that is already in your wardrobe. So this is about keeping what you have, buying less, using it for a longer period of time. And from that way, we can reduce the amount of clothing and the amount of waste, and also the amount of clothes that are being manufactured and sold, which will in turn then reduce those CO2 emissions and use less water and overall protect the planet in any way we can. So we all can do our bit, even if we all do a small bit to help, it will all then merge together and help in the long run. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen. I'm going to now pass you back to Karishma, who is going to then introduce our guests for today. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Lorna. That's lots of food for thought and really, really interesting. So hopefully that's set you up with what sustainability is all about and an overview. Before I introduce our guest speakers, I'm going to encourage all of you to share in the chat any questions or any comments you have throughout this event. And at the very end, after the talks with our guests, I'll also put these questions to them as well. So if you want to continue sharing your questions and comments in the chat, I'll look at them at the very end and ask our guests. So without further ado, our guest speakers today are Kat Drew. So Kat is Chief Design Officer at the Design Council, and she has a wealth of experience implementing design into the public sphere. She co-founded the government's Policy Lab, and she has over 10 years of experience with design and government. She's also recently been a big part of Design for Planet, which is a two-day conference taking place next week, which you can also sign up to. It's free. And there's really no better person to take us through an overview as to where this sector is heading in terms of sustainability as well. So we're really delighted to have Kat with us today. We also have Shifra. So Shifra Caherty is from Jump the Hedges. She's a former Adidas designer, and then she set up her own company, Jump the Hedges, which is a design brand known for its materials and waste-led approach. And really, she's looking at the full cycle of sustainability within her products. Her bags in Jump the Hedges are made from reclaimed truck tarp and waste airplane seat pads, amongst other things. And again, two really fascinating speakers to hear from today. So really delighted to have both Shifra and Kat with us today. I'm going to hand over first of all to Kat to take us through her talk, and then I'll introduce Shifra after that. So let me just remove my screen here, and I'll hand over to Kat.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. First share of the morning. Always have to get back into it. Oops. Oops. I'll get you back up to the top. Right. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah. Great. I can't see you at all now. So anyway, but yeah, it's lovely to be here with all of you virtually. My name's Kat. I'm the Chief Design Officer at the Design Council, and as Karishma said, I'm going to be talking to you about Design for Planet. So just as a bit of framing, I mean, Lorna did this so well, but you know, I'm going to zoom out a little bit away from fashion and talk about design more generally. And to start with, you know, design shapes the world. The clothes that we wear, the places that surround us, the services and products that we use, all of these things are shaped by designers, and some of them are designed really, really well, and some of them designed not so well. And we know that the climate crisis is upon us. COP26 started yesterday, and I'm sure lots of you have been reading all of the kind of the content and the journalism that's coming out. But you know, whether it's big, it's impacting us all across the world, whether it's flooding in this country or in the kind of the Mekong Delta, heat waves in Siberia, and also kind of wildfires in California, and you know, massively affecting even down to our biodiversity. The moth I've put here in my cousin's degree show, it was all about how the humidity in the atmosphere, which is increasing, is making it harder for bats to communicate with each other, because they're struggling with sonar in more humid temperatures. So it's having a massive impact. And in many ways, design has got a huge role to play. I mean, Lorna just shared some of the stats from the fashion industry, and here are some more from wider. But you know, fashion is the third most polluting industry. If you think about products, 80% of the environmental impact of products and services comes from the design stage, from the decisions that designers make. And you know, greenhouse gases will be reduced a lot by renewable energy and the switch to kind of renewables there, but actually the remaining 45 needs to come from the products we use every day. We know that a huge amount is also emitted from the construction industry, so you've got architects over that side. And we know that nature-based solutions have the potential to address a third of cost-effective climate change mitigation. So design has got a huge role to play. And we're going to have to redesign almost every aspect of our lives. So that's not only the way that we use materials in how we construct all these products, our clothes, our places, but also in the way that we live our lives, which is essentially less consumerist. And Design Council was set up in 1944. You can see the first council meeting there ever, with ashtrays down the centre of the table, a couple of women. And it was really set up to promote the use of design to help the UK get out of the post-war economic slump. So the biggest challenge of their time was that post-war economic recovery. And at the time, it was very much focused around products and industrial, and making sure that the quality was really high so people could purchase these things at mass. And you know, 75 years later, we've just launched our new campaign, Design for Planet. So the biggest challenge of our lifetimes is the climate crisis, and therefore we are shifting all of our energy and galvanizing the partners we work with, and the design industry across fashion, architecture, products, to galvanise 1.69 million strong UK design community to design with the welfare of the planet as a priority. And as Karishma said, next week we are doing a big festival called Design for Planet, and please go to www.designforplanet.org to sign up, and it's loads of amazing content. So this is it, and it will be, we've got about 4,000 people joining us from all over the world, so please do come and be part of it and share it with your friends. So where to start now? I'm going to set out some areas. Part of what we do as Design Council is we represent the whole of the design economy, and actually there's loads of places that designers can learn from each other or work with each other, and we are in a crisis, so we have to move together urgently, and we can do that by working fast. We can go faster and further if we learn from each other. So design is needed in many areas, but to draw out a few, we need to design resilient and sustainable places with an emphasis on adaptation as well as mitigation. We need to limit the temperature rises to well, 1.5 degrees. We're at 1.1 degrees currently, but we are going to have to adapt to changing weather conditions. We're going to have to conserve and regenerate natural resources. This is what Lorna's been talking about with circular design, and of course learning from Mother Nature herself, one of the best designers we have. And we also have to design products, places and services that make it easy and attractive to live sustainably. So not just using sustainable materials, but actually creating things that shift our behaviour to more sustainable ones. So to take you through some examples, this is Port Loop in Birmingham, and it's a beautiful kind of canal side living quarter in the heart of Birmingham. And not only have all their houses been designed so that they are kind of zero carbon, but actually they think about it much more holistically. So they've also created a community front room called Civic Square, an arts house called The Yard, run by the Maya Collective. And so it's not just about the architecture, but actually it's about a load of services and community kind of activities so that people live sustainably. So they've got a set of 10 island rules, which are things like plant whatever doesn't move, and recycle everything, where they really encourage people not just to live in, you know, really insulated houses, but also to live sustainably, to recycle and to renew. So many of the really great examples, I think, of sustainable design tackle both kind of environmental and social. And again, Lorna mentioned that kind of in the fashion industry, it's obviously the materials, but it's also the working conditions of the people producing them. This is Salford, just outside Manchester, and they have created a wetlands, and I'm using wetlands all the time at the moment because they're amazing examples of not only a natural flood defence, but also a place where people can go and walk and cycle, and it's good for their mental health. So here they were initially going to put in a concrete flood defence, but actually when they spoke to the local community and understood what they needed, which was green space to exercise, they completely flipped it and created this wetlands. And the wetlands is also not just good for health and well-being of people, but also for economic benefits. This is one over in Singapore, which does the same thing. It's a natural flood defence, but actually it also is an ecotourism hotspot, so creating money for the local economy. And over in India, there's another wetlands which also produces loads of places to grow food, because certain of the kind of the microorganisms that live there will break down the kind of the raw sewage that kind of filters through the Kolkata wetlands and make it into places, into clean water that actually they can use to grow food to feed the city. So it's completely circular in that kind of macro way. Products that are easy and attractive to use. So this is an example of safety net technologies, which is a kind of a light emitting sonar that you attach to a fishing net, which emits light to repel and attract certain fishes so you don't overfish them. And here the design work was really making sure that that piece of technology fitted into the fishing culture of both Peru in this case, but also in Scotland. So creating something that fisher families in the north of Scotland or in Peru would actually want to use, and they could use on a kind of a very rocky fishing boat. And this is another nice example of where you're making it easy and attractive to live sustainably. So .commoney is a new credit card where you can set your carbon limit as well as your credit limit, and making it kind of a really easy way to understand how you're consuming carbon through the things that you're buying. And then finally onto circular and regenerative design, which a lot of what we'll be talking, like Shifa will be talking about more. So starting with a non-fashion item, this is Colliebox, and it's the UK's first fully reusable takeaway box. And they thought very, very carefully about the material choice, actually going in the end for plastic, because you can use it, you can actually reuse it more than bamboo, which you can't recycle because of the glue that binds it together. But also they've got a digital service that wraps around it so that you can reuse it once you've eaten your food and return it to the restaurant. And then, of course, fashion. And in a way, there's so many great examples within fashion of really good circular and regenerative design. And I'm going to start with a kind of another macro one. So this is the campaign by Fashion Revolution, which I'm sure you all know about. I Made Your Clothes. But Fashion Revolution was started by Ursula de Castro, who will be speaking next week at the festival. And really hers is a big kind of worldwide campaign which designs systemically, because it thinks about kind of how to eliminate waste within chemicals, within water, and within kind of textiles. But she also thinks about it at the level of policy and also at the level of campaigns. And she thinks about it as an environmental crime and a social crime. So she's really thinking big picture, and they've done lots of things, but one of them is this campaign, I Made Your Clothes, which really tries to connect, create relationships between the people who consume and the people who make clothes, and make it into a human thing, so you're less likely to throw your clothes away if you've got these human connections. And then we've got lots of great examples around fashion brands who have been kind of reusing different materials. This is Elvis and Cressy that have reused fire hose pipes to make their bags, and we will be hearing from Shifra in a second about her wonderful designs. And there's also lots of other places where people are using, like Natsai Chiesa, who are thinking about how we can work with bio-design to create natural fibres and to work with kind of the living world in order to make them out of silk or so on. And then, as Lorna also said, there's lots of new services springing up all over to take our old clothes and kind of create services so they can be reused. So Depop is a really great one, but also Her Collective and Vestair if you want something kind of slightly more upmarket. And loads more of these will pop up. And then you get into the kind of the whole repair, which again links back to skills in local economies. So just a bit thing then of how we're supporting the design industry to do that. So we know that design therefore has to change. This is Don Norman, kind of the godfather of UX design. And he said, almost everything I see is artificial, designed by people over thousands of years. If people designed it, maybe design can change it. But to do this, everything has to change. So we just published something that we call our systemic design framework, which you can I'll put in the chat, you can see it on our website. But really, this is our framework that we like to share for designers to work with non-designers and others to design kind of systemically. And it's got 4 characteristics, 6 principles, and an expanded process. And for some of you who might have heard of the Double Diamond, which is our world famous design process that we created in the 2000s, this is the kind of the new version of it. So to quickly run through you some of these things, we think designers for Planet work system have these 4 characteristics. They think in systems, they see the bigger picture, see how things are interconnected. They zoom between the micro and the macro and across silos. They're of course designers and makers. Sometimes when you're dealing with complex challenges, people can get overwhelmed with that complexity, but designers can cut through by starting to make something tangible. They're great leaders and storytellers who can show what's possible and paint that really hopeful vision. Fashion Revolution's campaigns are always they're never finger waggy. They're always really hopeful and like you want to be part of them. And connectors and conveners, because we know that actually we can't do this all alone. If we want to design for Planet, we have to work with others. So people who can build really good relationships. And then we've got 6 principles, which again, I'll talk you through, starting at the top, being people-centered and planet-centered, both of these things. Being inclusive and welcoming difference, because actually lots of cultures, non-Western cultures, have been working in harmony with the planet for many, many years, and we need to learn from them. Zooming in and out, seeing the micro and the macro, collaborating and connecting, and then testing and growing on ideas. And I like this idea of growing ideas because actually it means that you're inspiring others to lead from your example. And then of course, being circular and regenerative as that core principle. And then to just talk you through the bit of the process, we, for those who don't know the double diamond, this is what we created in the 2000s, and essentially it's 2 diamonds of divergent and convergent thinking, where before you jump to a solution, in the kind of the second diamond, you start with an exploration of what is really, really needed here. Why do we even need clothes in the first place? What are those kind of essential human needs and aspirations? And then around it, though, we know that there are really important things that need to happen, which often get forgotten in a design process. But starting off with that vision setting and orientation, really making sure that we've all got the same values to start before we enter into a design process, building in time for making those connections and relationships and doing that kind of leadership and storytelling, because actually some people might not, this might be new for some people. And then when you finish, your design is never done really, you need to kind of continue the journey. So starting with divergent and convergent thinking, making sure that you spend enough time on the invisible stuff around the design process, zooming in and out, seeing the micro and the macro, disrupting and remaking kind of like some of the essential ways that we live our lives. And as I say, part of a longer continuous journey. And yeah, and just before I go into my last slide, I'll just say that a couple of years ago, when I first started, Karishma invited me over to Belfast, and we ran a couple of sessions as part of Belfast Design Week. And that was really the start of trying to create this new framework, because we were asking people to say how they were using the double diamond, but also all the things that were missing when people were working for kind of more social and environmental benefits. So all of that, I hope you can see reflected in here. So to finish my talk then, so some places for you to start. So to think about how you can start with a circular or regenerative mindset. How can you design expansively so that you're achieving multiple sustainable benefits, environmental ones and social ones? How can you tell the story to inspire others and open up the possibility from which other designs emerge? And how can you collaborate or build a relationship with someone else to create further innovation? So final two things to leave you with. We've been talking to many people as we've been creating our Design for Planet campaign. One of those is Kate Raworth, who wrote Donut Economics, which kind of challenges the core of our extractive economic paradigm and shifts us to a more regenerative one. And she said to us, if you're not designing for planet, what planet are you on? And that's our kind of rallying cry that we're using every morning at Design Council. And yeah, and I'll just leave it at, please go to www.designforplanet.org and sign up for our 2 days of 50 of the most amazing designers from around the world and across the design economy, all sorts of different backgrounds, and please share it with your friends. So thank you.
That's wonderful, Kat. Thanks very much. Brilliant first talk. I think you'll agree, and a great overview about all the different types of design within sustainability as well, and how they all connect together as well. And lots of tools to take forward. So I've shared some of them in the chat there, and I've shared Design for Planet there as well. So I'd love to introduce Shifra next from Jump the Hedges. He'll be taking you through her talk. And again, if you've got any questions for either of our speakers or even Lorna as well from the start, if you want to add in any questions into the chat, we'll ask them at the very end. So I'll hand over now to Shifra.
Great, thank you so much, Karishma. And thank you very much, Kat, for such an interesting talk. It's always difficult to follow such a good talk. It was excellent, I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to open up my PowerPoint. So if Karishma, if you could tell me if it looks okay whenever I...
Sure.
Let me see.
Yes, you can see that. I think it just has to go to full screen, but we can see that.
And is that us? Are we okay?
Perfect. Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming along this morning. And it's very exciting to see such an interest in sustainability and in design, and particularly here in Belfast. It's really exciting that things like this are happening and that this initiative has been put together. So thank you for coming, and thank you for asking me to be part of this, Karishma. So Jump the Hedges. is my business. My name is Shifa Carty, and I founded Jump the Hedges roughly about 6 years ago. But today I'm going to talk about what sustainability is to me and to my business. I'm going to look at what I believe sustainability is, why I feel it's important, and how I apply sustainability to my business. So before I go into that, I'm going to bring you back and give you a brief overview of how I got to be where I am today. So let's go back to 2009. So I was a young, fresh graduate from NCAD in Dublin. I had just done fashion design, and I wasn't really sure what to do or where to go. And one of my tutors wisely told me to go where I wanted and work will follow. And this really has been the process I have lived by, really. All my jobs have been in places that I wanted to be, essentially. And I have continued to go by this. So just to have a brief overview of what I've done to date. So my first job was with a company called Port West in County Mayo on the west coast of Ireland, where I worked as a outdoor clothing designer. This was very much a baptism of fire, this job. I was a very fresh-faced graduate and didn't really have a huge amount of experience, and I learned a huge amount in this role, and it definitely paved the way for all my future positions. After this, I moved to San Francisco, and I assisted a senior pattern cutter for Levi's, and this was a really interesting position. I got to help her develop the perfect fit range for Levi's, like the perfect fit t-shirt, the perfect fit tank top, and we developed a whole range of uniforms for the staff at the Ace hotels across America. So an amazing opportunity. And also the key takeaway for me from this experience was that I definitely did not want to be a full-time pattern cutter. So I always tell students, it's the things you realize that you don't like are as important as the things you realize you do like. After this, I moved to Adidas in Germany. And the way I'm telling this, it seems very like I just kind of went from one place to the other, but there's been lots of part-time jobs in between everything I've done, and lots of things that have remained off my CV: waitressing, nannying, bars, all sorts of things. So it definitely hasn't been a very straightforward process, but I was very determined to get the job in Adidas, and it was something that I'd always wanted. And I worked as part of the outdoor clothing team in Adidas, and this was a very interesting position because within Adidas, a lot of people don't even know that Adidas has an outdoor clothing team, because the main clients are in Germany and mainland Europe and Russia. And here in Ireland, we don't really see that many people wearing Adidas outdoor, but it was the biggest budget team within Adidas besides Y3 and Stella McCartney. So it's very interesting how even that has evolved to today, because outdoor clothing has become very much almost mainstream. You know, like when I worked in Adidas 7 years ago, you wouldn't really see someone wearing a high-tech Gore-Tex jacket walking down the street, but you do now. It's very much on the street level, and people are interested in outdoor wear, and they're interested in technical clothing. So this is where my interest in sustainability really began, was at Adidas. After Adidas, I moved back, and I really wanted to live on the west coast of Ireland again. So I got a job with Slendertone, which is where I worked as a apparel product designer, and I developed garments with that were electronically integrated for muscular rehabilitation. So if anybody ever tells you that there's no interesting jobs within fashion design, I can definitely tell you that there's a varied array of positions there. And then that brings me up to Jump the Hedges. So that's where I am now. So if I go back to 2012, when I was in Adidas, because this is really where I became very interested in sustainability. And as I had grown up within a family of, we had always recycled, we had always composted, but with regards to my degree, there was no conversation around sustainability. It definitely was not discussed. Sustainable fashion was not discussed. But in Adidas, it was very much a key element. And I talk a lot about my work being material-led, and that is the industry standard is to be design-led. And by design-led, I mean you come up, even if anybody has done GCSE art or A-level art, you come up with your theme, your idea, and then from that you develop your body of work. So like, for example, in Adidas, this was one of my mood boards, where it was all about summer camp and it was all about being outdoors and being free and useful. And from that, then I developed a concept, and the concept was based on climbing walls, horizons, and this is where I would take my design lines from. So this would be very much the standard design process, to be design led. I hope that makes sense. We can talk about it in the Q&A afterwards anyway. But this is the garments then I created from that. So if we just go back to this previous one, you can see the lines of the horizons, and then this would feed into, like, on the boys' jackets to the right, you can see the crossover of the seam lines and just small little details. But this is very much a design-led approach. You know, you're kind of just coming up with something and you're making it. And this is some of the garments in action, really. So you can see just some of the style lines and how it all feeds through and how it happens. So then in 2015, I eventually plucked up the courage to leave my secure job, and I jumped ahead. Just it was beginning to become a reality, and I moved back to live in the north, and I started a master's at the art college in multidisciplinary design. And this for me was very much a way to develop, because it was quite a business focused master's. It was a way for me to develop my business, but almost with a safety net, because I felt if the business fails, or if it's just a pipe dream that's never going to really work, at least I come out with a master's at the end of it. So within the master's, I developed a range of bags that were made from reclaimed materials. And this is some of my master's collection. And the reason why I use reclaimed materials was because this is 2015. So obviously it was very much a conversation around sustainability at that point, but it was very, very difficult for me at the very bottom of the ladder to get my hands on a lot of these sustainable materials. I was looking at these, you know, you see a lot of things now made from recycled plastic bottles, but back then you really didn't. And it was difficult to buy these things by the meter. And I had come across a lot of interest in Japanese fabrics in particular. But when I kind of sat down and thought about it, and bringing these fabrics over here, and yes, they had been made in a sustainable way. However, it just didn't really feel like it was a truly sustainable thing to do. And so I started to look around at what was available to me here in Belfast. And I managed to get my hands on a lot of banner cloth. And that's what I made my collection from. And it was more, as opposed to necessarily being a definite business direction, it was nearly like a statement. It was sort of, for me, my exhibition and the process was sort of saying, look at what can be created from reclaimed materials. You know, there's lots of other businesses doing it. There's Freitag in Switzerland that make bags from reclaimed truck tarps. There's I think it's M24 in Scotland. There's a couple of brands throughout England that make bags from like paddling pools or all sorts of things. So it's not a new concept. However, it's so very often overlooked. So 2021 brings us to now, and that's me working away very hard on my sewing machine. But with regards to the questions I posed at the start, so sustainability. What do I believe sustainability is? So I believe sustainability is maintaining life on Earth and the ecosystems required to support it. I think this is a really nice statement because it doesn't necessarily focus on fashion, on sustainable food. It's an overview, and I think that's really important to remember when we're approaching this, is that sustainability is not just, you know, buying sustainable clothing. It's a whole lifestyle, and it's a whole way of living, and it's something that isn't necessarily easy to do. It's just a way of living and a process and a learning. But the whole point of it is to support life on Earth and the ecosystems. So we looked at the what and then why. So there are many, many, many reasons why we try to be sustainable and we try to be eco-conscious. And, you know, I could give you lots of statistics and stuff, but I thought just for the sake of this process and the sake of me discussing design-led versus material-led approaches, I wanted to look at a place called Kantamanto in West Africa. So Kantamanto, as you can see here in the map, is in West Africa, and it is the largest secondhand clothing market in West Africa. Absolutely huge. 15 million items are unloaded here every single week. Like 15 million, kind of, it's really even difficult to imagine. It's such a huge amount. and 40% of this clothing in each bale becomes waste. So if you look at the image in the background, you see like just huge bags, like bales. That would be a bale. So a lot of vintage clothing sellers would get like bales, and within that, then I very often don't even get to pick what's in the bales. But for the market in West Africa, 40% of this becomes waste. So then they have to figure out what to do with all this waste. So the reason why I think Cantamanto is so interesting is because it's such an amazing example of sustainability, and they're desperately trying to be circular with all of our waste. So they extend the life of 20 to 30 million items per month. They wash them, over dye them, tailor them, upcycle them. And the tailoring industry is absolutely thriving in Cantamanto. But the problem is, and the reason why I think Cantamanto is such an important example, is that they just have too much, and they have too much waste. So it worked for a period of time, but now because of the quality of clothing is so poor, so much of this product is just waste. So it's becoming just a dumping ground. And no matter how hard they try, they're just trying to deal with all of our waste, and it's totally unsustainable. So sustainability, we looked at what I believe it is, why I feel it's important, and then how do I apply sustainability to my own practice and to my own work. So I have a material-led approach. So that means that I get the material and then I come up with how I'm going to work with it. I have an overall mood within my work, and this is kind of like a mood board I would use. And it's Belfast based. It's energy, it's movement, it's slightly conflicted. It's for me, it's exciting, it's vigorous, but then from that I create my products. But as I said, it's material led. So therefore I get my material and I have to figure out what I'm going to do with it. So I don't really sit and come up with I don't come up with a new collection every season or every couple of months. It's very much, I have to work with what I'm given. So I use truck tarpaulin currently. I also have started using waste leather, and that's something I'm going to be expanding on hugely over the next year. And both of these images are my own, and these are tarps that I have had that are long gone now. So on the left, so tarpaulin is one word and curtain side is another word. The reason why it's called a curtain side is because if you look at the image on the left, it actually looks like a curtain kind of pulled over. They kind of have little wheels all at the top of them. And then the right, this is 3 40-foot tarps rolled up. And these are the materials I choose to use. I use them because they're colourful, they're incredibly durable, and I have managed to create a system and a network where I'm able to get them. So this is a wee video of me cutting the tarps. I wish I was this speedy. Unfortunately, I'm not. And it just kind of showcases the work involved. There's a huge amount of work in using reclaimed materials. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about it, is because I feel we all need to be really aware of this. Like there's so much available to us, and we need to do our best to use it really. So everything that I'm lifting here is all stuff I can use, but a lot of this stuff that I'm leaving here can't actually be used because maybe it's damaged or maybe it's heavy metal hardware. So I use the large majority of the tarp, but not 100% of the tarp. So this is an example of, again, some tarps on the left that I would have used, and then on the right is one of my newer products. So I developed these over COVID, really, to be honest. I call it the mini tote, and this is my Dolly Parton range. So I'm getting to at long last create products that are inspired by my hero Dolly Parton. And then this is my fanny bag. So these are probably my #1 selling item, and they are just really simple little bags. And for me, the having a material-led approach had a huge amount of trial and error. Like I have to really play around with the fabric and create shapes that actually work with the fabrics. The mini tote was in production for a long time because the material is so thick and heavy. I had to keep figuring out you can't just have a regular seam. I had to figure out how to rotate my seams and change things around so that I was actually able to make it really because there's no give on the material at all. It's totally solid. Again, this is more of the mini tote, which I've laser cut also to develop just something different really to change up the fabric. This was a project that I did during lockdown where I basically did it was called fannying at home, and I got people to send me images of them fannying about at home with their Jump the Hedges products. This is local architect Aoife Mulvena. And then alongside making the bags, prior to COVID, and I've done a couple online now as well, I lead workshops. And this is a really amazing opportunity for me to interact with the community in an education setting, or just, this was actually, the image on the right was at Culture Night Dublin. And I normally use banner cloth for these events, and the banner on the table are all old banners from Belfast Pride Festival. So they're really colourful and beautiful fabrics, and we make little accessories out of those. And it's just a really fun way to have like a nice a non-aggressive conversation around sustainability, because sometimes sustainability conversations can be a little bit like, you should do this and you should do that, but this is very much like a nice way to have conversations and people to talk about their frustrations about maybe they don't understand certain elements of recycling because it's very complex and not very well explained by the councils. And then also it's like just a way for people just to chat and to see, oh, you can actually create something from these materials. And then the left is a podcast that I did with RT2FM Tara Stewart that's available online now, and there's a couple of different speakers. It was a very interesting series, and if you're interested in learning a bit more, I definitely suggest you check it out. So just to finish up, I love this quote. It's from someone I feel is very influential to me anyway for the whole sustainability process, because she talks way beyond the spectrum of sustainability and talks about colonialism and just the impact and just all the different elements of it. And it's from Celine Seaman, who's the founder of Slow Factory. And she says, sustainability is a spectrum, a movement and a culture. It is a way of living and a way of doing business rooted in deep and continuous learning. And I think that's really important. We realise that it's a deep and continuous learning, and not to beat ourselves up if we don't have a keep cup or all our clothes are sustainable. You know, I think it's a way of living and a way of learning and continuing, but there's never going to be an end goal. And very often we can only do what we have access to. So I think it's just important that everybody tries to do their best and not punish themselves too much. That's me. Thank you very much.
Amazing, Shifra, thank you. Your story is so amazing, and even though I've heard both yourself and Kat speak before, there's always new parts to your story and how your business has evolved as well. And again, lots of food for thought and how we can really get involved in design and sustainability as well, because I think people don't know where to start sometimes, and that's the biggest struggle. You know, where do we start? How do we get involved? So I think you've given lots of really interesting food for thought there as well. So we have some questions here in the chat. So the first one I think is for Kat, which is, do you believe that digital fashion has a future to assist with sustainability in Northern Ireland, or do you believe that immersive technology such as VR or AR can assist with sustainability? For example, virtual garments, virtual catwalks, virtual fashion show in Northern Ireland.
So I'm so curious about them. I suppose I don't really have loads and loads of experience with them, but I think using digital in clever ways can help us kind of experience different types of clothing and so on. I suppose the slight warning with digital is that kind of there is a big kind of energy consumption around digital as well. It's like it might be invisible, but there's huge kind of power servers kind of in these huge warehouses. But again, there is some quite interesting stuff happening in the digital space as well. You know, there is Bitcoin, but there's also kind of new companies who are trying to mine Bitcoin in more regenerative ways using kind of renewable energy as well. So curious, want to know more, but I suppose also a kind of just a watch on the kind of invisible energy consumption of our digital world.
That's a very good point, actually, because we always think the physical things that we can actually see in person are where the waste is, but there's also the digital waste side of things that we never see, but we're all consuming so much of digital tech now as well. That's very, very interesting. So a question for Shifra. So I'm a final year student. This is from Illy. I'm a final year student and it is difficult to get my hands on affordable sustainable textiles. So how did you manage to overcome the challenge on sustainable material with low MOQ or affordable ones? And how would you advise fresh graduates?
Yeah, this is an issue. It's trying to get your hands on these materials because we're not yet at the stage where we can actually access them. You know, like I'm a small business and I still can't really access certain things. Like there's amazing mushroom leather, and I visited the lab in San Francisco, but I can't get my hands on that leather, for example. You know, it's impossible to, you know, you're talking like potentially thousands of meters of minimum order quantity. So I think with regards to from a student perspective, I think the whole concept of dead stock materials is an interesting route to look at, and look at not necessarily trying to buy new sustainable materials, because I think it's very important that we try to get this concept out of our heads, is that, you know, to get rid of, and go back to what Lorna said in her presentation, what we already have is actually much better. No matter how sustainably something is made, what we already have is actually much more sustainable than buying something new. So I had a student actually that did a fabulous collection. Amy, I think Amy Mary is her new brand name. And it was all about, she used all dead stock and vintage materials that she sourced in and around Belfast. And like she was using upholstery materials, she was taking apart old shirts, and the collection was absolutely fabulous. And it was as nice as any collection that was from brand new materials, but it had much more interesting story. And also she worked with the elements within the materials that were maybe showcasing like a little bit of wear and like what the former life of the material, which I loved. So I think I always advise students maybe not to torture themselves trying to buy these new sustainable fabrics. It's about working with what you already have. And then with regards to the second part of the question, was that just like a general advice for new graduates?
Yes.
Or
I think that's
my advice
fair,
is to
advice.
Pardon?
No, just saying yes, just general advice for fresh graduates.
Okay, my general advice for fresh graduates is to experience as much as possible of everything, and there's no specific route within design. I briefly talked about my career probably highlights, I would say, you know, but as I said, I make it very clear that there was lots of other jobs there that have fallen off the CV that kind of got me to where I am today. So I think it's very important to experience as much as possible, and to you know, to travel, to go places. You know, I've lived in San Francisco and Germany and New York and all over Ireland, and it's just really, it's definitely broadened my horizons. And I think that these jobs that we often torture ourselves about, like, oh, I should be doing something that's maybe more design or more serious whenever you're younger or whenever you're just graduated, they're the jobs that very often can define your future. And I know that I remember one of my tutors said to me in NCAD, when I was like worried about like how to move ahead or how to get jobs. And I remember her saying, oh, look, your personality will open up doors for you. And I remember kind of scoffing at this at the time and sort of thinking, no, I need a first class honours to open up doors. But it's so wrong. And it's so personality focused. And all those jobs that I really did not enjoy at the time have definitely sort of given me the soft skills to move into other teams. And that would be my advice to graduates, is to keep learning, keep exploring, and to not overlook those waitressing and those bar jobs, because they are helping you become a more resilient person, particularly if you want to have your own business.
Absolutely, and they're so people-centered, all of those jobs. So actually you really get to speak with a lot of interesting people and get to know different types of people within those jobs as well. So this is now opening up a conversation for all three of you, which is, how did you learn about which type of designer you are? So are you process-led, material-led, design-led? What do you actually mean by all of those things? And are these based on observations, or is there a test to learn about this? Is there some sort of psychometric test you can go through and then end up with that as a result?
Will I answer that one first, or?
Yeah, if you want to start off, Shiv.
Okay, so for me, definitely with regards to design versus material led, just through my own research and my understanding of my approach, to be perfectly honest, is how I've kind of explained this to myself. And you know, I've the traditional design and the education model, which really desperately needs to change, is a design-led approach. And we're talking a lot more about sustainability and circular processes, but it's still it still isn't fully implemented, but it definitely will be. I'm sure it will be. It has to be. And for me, with regards to my processes, was just trial and error and figuring things out, and kind of initially trying to be like this traditional design business where I was like, okay, I'll go seasonally and I'll have products at Christmas and summer, and I just realized this I can't actually do this because I'm working with such difficult materials. So when you work with reclaimed or sustainable materials in the way that I do, they dictate what you do, and that's what makes it sustainable, actually, is the fact that you're not frantically going through seasons and frantically trying to create new products. So with regards to whether you're a design-led or material-led business, that's just something that will happen organically with whatever your key material is, I feel.
Can I come in, because I think I've got a slightly different like response, and it's so interesting hearing you explain those things, Shifa. And I think in a previous conversation I was like, what's the material-led approach? I'm really curious. So I suppose for me, when I talk about design-led approach, the way that we talk about it at Design Council is that you don't jump straight to solutions. So I think it's actually quite different to how you would describe it, Shifa. So if you think about the double diamond model I was explaining, the kind of the ideas come, or the collection comes in the second diamond, and we say don't jump straight to that. Actually start with some exploration into what is needed. And I think the thing that I've learned from Shifa this morning is that my background, because I've come from social design, is all about what do people need, what are their aspirations. So it might be, I need to be warm, I need to feel like I've got an identity, I need to be able to exercise, or whatever those kind of needs are. But actually also, if we think about people and planet centered, we should also be thinking about what is available to us that is sustainable to design with, and actually see the kind of the material exploration as important as kind of social needs. And there is as I said, my background's in social design, thinking about homelessness or health or whatever. And there's a phrase that we use, but I think it's really applicable to materials as well, which is start with what's strong, not with what's wrong. And it's all about, when you work with kind of people who are suffering from kind of mental health or homelessness, quite often you start with risk factors and you go, what's wrong with all these people? And that's where you start. Whereas actually we always flipped it and started with what resources have they got available to them that we can build on. And I think there's a similar thing that we can, that applies to materials as well. So, yeah.
And I just talk a bit about, I suppose whenever I was a student many years ago, it would have been design led, where we would have been set a brief or a project, and you really started thinking about that sort of design concept, what you needed to do. And I suppose it was in those early stages they were trying to get you to be as creative as you could be, and then you would have then chosen your designs and then looked at suitable fabrics and having that understanding of what fabrics were suited to that particular design. And I suppose now that I have been designing for a number of years, you'd still I work to a lot of projects where the brief is set for me. I don't get to choose. And a lot of the work that we do together, Karishma, we're really the people that we work with already have an idea, they already have that concept, and we're then pushing through and looking at ways to actually manufacture, to make this. We're prototyping, we're then looking at different materials and researching the different materials, and we're giving those options to the client. And we do look at the sustainable, we look at the more natural fibres and that, and to give those options. But in reality, a lot of the newer, more sustainable fabrics are more expensive. So from a prototyping point of view, or someone who's really trying to launch a small business, a lot of it can come down to that cost as well, because these recycling of fabrics and these more natural fibres, it's a more expensive process nearly to get them to that stage. So it's about finding a balance. But I do think in general, most, as you say, small companies and that, you're not manufacturing, you're not a mass market. So you're manufacturing smaller amounts, and they're maybe more quality products, which means that people are going to use them for longer. So from that point of view, you do have this longer lifespan, and they're less likely to go to landfill. So I think the whole sort of design-led and material-led can sort of work hand in hand. And again, it depends on the project or the brief that you have been set.
That's really interesting. Three quite different perspectives about it, but also with lots of links up as well. And I think the big challenge is knowing what is truly sustainable as well, because something can appear as being a more sustainable option, but when you look at how it's maybe created, it's not necessarily the most sustainable. So it's very interesting to find out the provenance of all of these textiles and fabrics as well for fashion. So a question for Shifra. So drawing on your experience at Adidas, do you think achieving sustainability is possible for such a big, fast fashion-oriented company? Can they be game changers, or is there too much resistance to fundamentally shifting traditional business thinking?
Yeah, I definitely think that Adidas are probably, I would feel, one of the leading companies with regards to sustainable approaches to their design processes, particularly the outdoor department. And I think that inherently a business of that size will never be truly sustainable. However, when they push the agenda and they create things, it makes it easier for the likes of me, a smaller business at the bottom, to take advantage of the things that they're doing. So when they make it necessary to have a sustainability section on your website, a sustainability filter whenever you're choosing your product, this becomes your consumer wants this. And then with regards to them using more sustainable fabrics, therefore there's a more abundance of it. So therefore, again, it'll trickle down to the smaller businesses, and it means more access. So that's the hugely positive aspect of the likes of Adidas trying to be and being more sustainable as a big business, and it's their responsibility to do this. But inherently, a business of that size, it truly can't be that sustainable, really, you know, if it's creating such an amount of product. But they are creating a lot of new interesting things, the Parley Ocean range, for example, and a lot of circular processes within their footwear. Footwear is hugely unsustainable because of all the elements and the glue, but they're definitely doing interesting things. But I think that it's very important for the likes of Adidas to pave the way so that smaller brands can take advantage of the direction that they have created for us.
That's very interesting, actually, because sometimes it's the big companies, whenever they make even a small change to how they work, that can have a global impact because so many people are purchasing from them and so many items are being made. So that's very, very interesting. Thank you, Shifra. I've got a question here for Kat from Jill. So our business is mostly a vintage and antiques homeware store just outside Belfast, 14,000 square foot of antique salvage upcycling. My question is about how do you see this area of furniture design and retail being discussed within the design space? What we do and sell is not considered design, nor quite fits the category, because we're not actually designing it unless we're upcycling. And we also have the challenge of raising how vintage and antiques are viewed. We can't all be curated Danish teak. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on where our category fits within the design conversation, especially now as it is wholly sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose as someone who's just renovated their house, I think, you know, all of my stuff has come from kind of secondhand and refurbished. So I think there's so much. It's just gorgeous. It's just gorgeous stuff to work with, and I think it's interesting just to see. And you know, it's your industry, but there are, in the same way as fashion trends, there are same trends in kind of antiques and what kind of period is fashionable. So obviously mid-century modern is very fashionable at the moment, but actually, you know, 10 years ago that would have been like, oh my god, that's kind of, my granny would have had that and not been fashionable at all. So it's got a similar rhythm, I think, to kind of to fashion and to trends. And I think personally for me, I want to see that sort of area as design, because design doesn't have to be about creating new things all the time. It can be about kind of reusing and reimagining what exists already. So so I think kind of creating that narrative that it is part of it. And you can see already, you know, within the fashion industry as well, people are starting to kind of put in magazines, these are the things that you can buy for new, these are the things that are on Depop or thrift shops, these are the things that you can rent. So, you know, it would be great to see a similar conversation happening in the interior design space. We've got a talk next week by Alicia Story, who is an interior designer from Scotland. So she's doing a workshop all about this next week at our Design for Planet Festival. She is the UK chapter head of Climate Designers, which is a global network across the world about designs for climate. And then the other thing I'll just say on that is I think one of the things that we do need to do more of is think about community skills in upcycling and recycling. And IKEA has actually just done a really interesting project funded by the National Lottery Community Fund called Places Called Home. And this is a big community skills building programme around upcycling, particularly IKEA furniture, which is obviously very affordable and then but gets thrown out quite often. So thinking about how communities can disassemble and reuse. And I suppose what IKEA does have is, because you can assemble it yourself, you can disassemble it quite easily. It's not put together with lots of glue. So actually thinking about, and this applies as well for kind of fashion, how you disassemble and take apart material so that you can patch it back together in different ways, I think is incredibly exciting.
That's really interesting, especially that point about being able to pick apart that, because we do think of it in terms of furniture, but it could lead into other areas as well. Very, very interesting. And also another question for Jill from for Shifra. Great talk, thank you. I fully appreciate the time it takes to use recycled materials, but my question is, do you see a plan to move into homewares? I would love to chat sometime if you do. That's maybe a short answer.
Unfortunately not. No, I don't see myself moving into homewares. I enjoy the more fashion end of things, to be honest, and I like making bags, and yeah, I don't necessarily see myself moving into homewares. So sorry, Jill, unfortunately not.
There's a gap in the market there, though, potentially for another business.
Yeah.
Okay, so a question from Lise next. Fabulous presentation. Question to you both. How important do you think it is for a buyer to see the actual product before purchase? COVID lockdowns proved how increasingly online buying is. Do you see this as the start of the end of high street and in-person buying?
I mean, I might go first, and this is probably not a fully formed thought, but I think there's a bit of a tension there actually, because part of, and I can see it behind Shifra actually, the kind of I Made Your Clothes campaign is about recreating that relationship with between both the person and the material and the person who's produced it. And I think lots of the kind of the frictionless ease of online takes all of that away. Like, it's so easy to click and buy something. You don't even need to put in your card details anymore. And, you know, in a way, this is kind of some of the ironies of design, because UX design can make it so easy, so frictionless, that it just means we are over consuming. So actually you almost need to introduce some kind of friction into the design process, create some more relationships between, you know, what you're buying and the person who's made it, or the materials and where it's come from, or where it's going to end up, so that people can make more sustainable decisions.
I think just to add on to that, I think it's really interesting about the disconnect between the maker and the product. And I feel like the reason why my business has grown over COVID is actually because of all those in-person meetups that I had prior to COVID, going to all the Christmas markets in particular, and meeting so many people and going to events and meeting people. And I think that's actually what paved the way for things. So I think for a small business, I think it's actually really important to meet your customer, and also for feedback, you know, like it definitely gives you a tough skin standing at a market stall listening to people talk about your product, you know. So you don't get any of that whenever you're online, you know. You just get well, now I'm very lucky today. I haven't had any negative feedback, but you know, you generally just get positive feedback the whole time. So getting out there and meeting the customer and watching them interact with your product, that's hugely important, because you know, there's things that I take for granted that I just assume, oh, they'll know how to do that, or that's very clear, and then you see people looking kind of confused, or I remember when the very first product I made myself was just yoga bags. And I remember doing a market and everybody kept coming over going, what do I put in this? You know, and I was like, a yoga mat. I thought it was so obvious. And everybody was like, no, it just looks like a really odd shaped bag. So I think it's really important to have these in-person interactions. And I think I'm a big believer in retail and in high street and in store. I love being in stores, and particularly curated nice stores. But there is a big problem with wholesale, and I think that's a huge conversation that needs to be addressed. That if you're a small maker and you want to sell into a shop, the wholesale idea of being marked up 2.5 or 3 times your wholesale price is totally unachievable, and that's why I don't sell anywhere else. I just do direct to consumer online. And that is something that dramatically needs to shift in order to encourage and allow small makers to sell into shops. Otherwise, we're just going to have hugely mass-produced products on our shelves. And that's kind of where it's going. You know, I go into very few stores and see small, locally made products. There's like a handful that have them. So I think the wholesale thing is what holds the likes of me back from going in and selling my product in stores.
I think there's nothing that beats actually being able to see things in person as well. And like you said, you know, it's hard to actually put yourself out there sometimes when you've created a product and get that harsh sometimes feedback as well. But I think it's so important to, you know, move on to your next phase of your yourself as a designer as well. That's very, very good advice there. So a last question there then for Lorna. So can you tell us more about new business models? How does sustainability influence new organizational structures of running and managing a company? New jobs, for example. Many thanks.
I suppose a lot of it really just does depend on the company and what they're actually doing and what scale they're actually sort of making or manufacturing on. Really to sort of re-look at business models, I suppose most businesses, the aim is really to make a product and make money, profit. It would be the main thing. And I think it's really sort of looking at things to try and understand how the business can actually take a more sustainable approach to what they're doing. And it's about being more conscious and more aware if you're actually manufacturing a product, how much waste is there with regards to fabric manufacture, whatever, the fabric use, energy, resources and things like that. So it's about sort of limiting that amount of waste that you're not having a bigger impact on the environment. And as we did talk about, several of us, we were talking about this energy conservation, and there are it's also sort of looking at how your machinery is already functioning. Maybe it would be worthwhile to invest in more efficient machinery. And I suppose it's also like doing sustainability reports and monitoring and just seeing the impact that you do have on the environment. But as I say, it does depend on the business that you're running. You could be reusing fabrics instead of using virgin materials all the time. There's other ways that you go really demand-led, where you make a product and you don't make massive amounts of them. You sort of then take in orders and you will only make really based on your demand. So there are many different approaches, and I think it really just does depend on your business and what scale you're actually doing the things. But your main thing is looking at your waste and looking at how efficient and how much energy you're actually using within your business.
Thanks, Lauren. I think that's very thoughtful and detailed. That's great. And there's a question there from Kat, maybe as an add-on to both what you and Shifa were saying there. Are there any policies or laws that govern wholesale?
No, not that I'm aware of. Anytime I've been approached stores, it's very much seen as just a known fact. It's like, oh, well, it's 2.5, or else for fashion it can be 3 times. So that's why we're having dresses that are 300, 400 euro, and maybe the designer is maybe getting less than 100 euro from it. You know, it's definitely less than 100 euro from it actually. So it definitely is something that needs to have some sort of policy on it, because it is definitely killing small businesses being in stores.
I think there's also a chain of it as well, isn't it? It's almost as though, you know, the retailers, if it's a small independent, for example, maybe needs to be helped in terms of the council and the rates, and then that can be passed on then to the small business. I feel like it's all very, very linked as well.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, it's definitely a circular thing. You know, it needs to be, multiple people need to be involved. It can't just really be between the maker and the store. You're right, Karishma. It needs to be a bigger conversation. Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to our amazing guests, Kat and Shifra. Like, so much food for thought. It'd been lots of notes, and I'll do a little follow-up blog after this as well. But fantastic, so interesting, and hopefully everyone's got a lot from it. I think people have, with all the questions coming in, and Lorna's fantastic introduction about sustainability and all of her amazing work as well. Thank you all so much. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly share my screen again and just leave you with just a final slide so you can do some follow-up. And I don't know if anyone has any final sort of thoughts they want to share as well before we finish up for today. From yourself, maybe Shifra, maybe to kick off, if you have any final
just
things.
A big thank you to everybody for coming along, and just to add on to the question to Lorna with regards to new business models. I did a Winston Churchill. I'm a Winston Churchill fellow, and I did a sustainability research trip across North America and Europe, and I came across some absolutely amazing initiatives that are really good examples of circular processes. And two, if you're interested in looking them up, the two key ones I felt were probably the standout were the Eileen Fisher Renew scheme in New York. This is amazing. And the week before, when I visited the week before, H&M had been there, and they were like amazed at the work that Eileen Fisher was doing. So Eileen Fisher's this very traditional but very cool American company, and she'd always used natural fibers, but she started one of the best and most successful bring back schemes where customers bring back their the old clothes, and Eileen Fisher's Renew team either takes them apart and makes them into new products, which they then resell, or else they use the fibers to create new materials. And they recently bought a felting machine, and like they're making all these really cool felt products, and it's such a good initiative. And the H&M team were so amazed by it, but they just felt like, we have too much stuff. Where would we even start trying to do this? And also, it's about beginning with the end in mind. Eileen Fisher has always used natural and good materials, so therefore she's getting clothes back from customers that are 20 and 25 years old, you know, that have stood the test of time. So that's a really good example. And then another good example is a place I visited in Portland, and it's the Renewal Factory. And I've seen them coming up a little bit more now in the media. And basically, the Renewal Factory were the first to kind of talk about dead stock, and they partnered with the North Face, and I think maybe Patagonia and maybe another brand, and they take back all their dead stock. And dead stock might be something that just didn't sell. It might be something that might have a broken zip. It might be perfectly fine. And then they are reselling it and renewing it. So the Renewal Factory is an amazing initiative. So they're just the two that I think are definitely well worth looking at for successful approaches to circular design, if anyone's interested.
It's great to actually look those up, because then you can see what someone has done very well and take inspiration from that too. So thank you very much, Shifra.
Absolutely.
And Kat, do you have any sort of final things you want to say before we wrap up for today?
I mean, my big takeaway from this conversation is to really emphasize the point of not just jumping straight to the solution or to the design, but actually spending some time really understanding first the materials that are available to us, but also some of that kind of fundamental, why are we creating clothes in the first place? Like, what are the needs that this is actually meeting? And then I guess the final thing I would say is that this has been such a fantastic conversation. I've learned so much, and thank you, Lorna, and thank you, Shifra, for sharing everything, and Karishma for creating the space, and everyone for coming. I would love to see as many of you as possible next week on the 9th and 10th at our festival. So please do go on www.designforplanet.org. We will also be sharing a short 90-second film about Design for Planet, which we'd like every designer to be able to play to their clients when they set the brief, to give them permission to talk about the planet right from the beginning. And there is a very special star who's on this call who's part of that, so you can see a bit more of Shifra then as well.
I was going to say, I wonder who that is. You gave it away, Kat. You gave it away. And Lorna, do you have any final things you'd like to add as well?
Well, it's just really to thank everybody for joining us, and as I say, Shifra and Kat, very interesting talks as well. And it's lovely to actually now be looking at this whole sustainability and addressing it. And even from my point of view, it's a long time ago whenever I did my design degree, and things have changed quite radically. And I think it is about sort of there was the whole industrial revolution, and everything has now really snowballed. Everything's moving really, really quickly. And I think we all just generally, we all need to slow down and just sort of start thinking, do we really need the things that we are buying? Can we just use what we have in our wardrobes? Because as I say, that is the most sustainable garment that is out there, the ones that we already own. And it is about making those small changes. We all sort of think we can't save the world single-handedly, but together we can make small changes that will then push those changes ahead.
Absolutely. We can all do something, probably starting today, that makes that difference as well. And I suppose to leave you on one final thought is from what was discussed a bit earlier, that, you know, we think about people-centered design, but maybe it's people and planet-centered design that comes together in how we design for the future. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us. Lots of great questions, and, you know, do stay in touch after as well. You've got our Twitter addresses, you've got the email address for the Belfast Met, and huge thanks to Belfast Met as well for helping us do this today. And hope you join us for the rest of Belfast Design Week for some of the other events. And thank you so much to all of our amazing speakers.
Thank you
See
so
you soon.
much.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
See you soon.